I built the walnut dining table in our home with my own hands, but on our 34th wedding anniversary, my wife used it as the stage to tell everyone I had become dead weight. 12 people heard her say it. My pastor, my sister, my closest friends, both of my children, and the man who controlled every dollar inside my company. Diane lifted her wine glass, smiled at me, and said, "Walter doesn't carry much anymore. Most days we carry him, but I suppose that's what love looks like." Everyone waited for me to laugh. I did. Then my son raised his glass to her and said, "Mom deserves a medal." That was the moment I understood my stroke had not merely weakened my right hand. It had given the people closest to me permission to start measuring how much easier their lives might become without me. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. My name is Walter Combs. I was 66 years old, and I had built Combs Fine Woodworks from a 2-car garage into a company employing 42 people. The table beneath Diane's china had been one of my first serious pieces. I made it from black walnut salvaged after a storm, sanding every edge while our children slept upstairs. Diane used to tell guests it represented our marriage, strong, useful, and built to outlast us both. 4 months before that anniversary dinner, I suffered a mild stroke beside the bandsaw at our Riverside Drive workshop. My speech recovered, and my mind remained clear, but my right hand shook after a long day. I could no longer stand at a workbench for 8 hours, so I transferred more floor responsibilities to Miguel Ortiz, my shop foreman of 15 years. I believed adjusting my role was wisdom. Diane apparently saw it as evidence that my usefulness had expired. She had invited everyone who mattered to us. Pastor Dan and his wife sat beside my sister Joyce. Our son Preston brought his girlfriend, Ashley. Our daughter Callie came alone. Gary Whitfield, the CFO I had trusted for 11 years, sat across from me with his wife Renata. For the first hour, the dinner felt like a celebration. Then Renata asked how the transition at the company was progressing. Diane set down her glass. "Walter has been such a trooper since the stroke," she said. "But we've had to reorganize everything because he can't carry what he used to." I tried to keep the moment light. "I still have plenty of sawdust left in me." Diane laughed and looked toward Gary rather than me. "Honestly, he's dead weight some days, but we love him anyway." Silence fell across the table I had built. Pastor Dan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Joyce stared at Diane. Callie slowly placed her napkin beside her plate, her hands trembling with anger. Gary looked down, but Preston smiled as though his mother had finally said something everyone privately believed. "Mom's been handling a lot," he said. "Someone should acknowledge that." I looked at my son. His title was Vice President of Sales, a position I had given him despite his limited experience. "Do you think your mother carries me?" I asked. Preston avoided my eyes. "I think things have changed, Dad." Diane touched his arm approvingly. That small gesture hurt more than her words. It showed me this conversation had happened before, just not when I was present. Callie pushed her chair back. "He had a stroke, Mom. He didn't stop being a person," Diane sighed. "Nobody said that. You called him dead weight in front of everyone. It was a joke." Every face turned toward me, waiting for me to rescue the evening. So I smiled. "Someone has to carry the weight around here. I suppose it can be me for once." The table relaxed. Pastor Dan gave an uncertain laugh. Diane reached for the serving spoon, satisfied that I had repaired the discomfort she created. Beneath the table, my hand shook, and it had nothing to do with the stroke. I helped clear the plates and thanked everyone for coming. But I also watched. Gary and Diane exchanged a glance when they thought I was turned away. Preston followed his mother into the kitchen and lowered his voice when I approached. Only Callie hugged me at the door and whispered, "Dad, that wasn't a joke." "I know," I said. After everyone left, I went upstairs and lay beside the woman I had loved for 34 years. At 11:14, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. A lawyer asked whether I was ready to sign the documents selling my company the following morning. Until that call, I thought dead weight was the cruelest thing Diane had planned for me. I was wrong. It was only the explanation she intended to use after everything I built was taken away. I carried my phone into the hallway and closed the bedroom door behind me. Closing documents for what? I asked. The woman on the line hesitated. The sale of Combs Fine Woodworks, Mr. Combs. I was told you had already reviewed the terms. My bare feet felt cold against the hardwood. Who told you that? I'm calling from Holloway and Nash, on behalf of your wife's attorney. My name is Patricia Vance. She spoke more slowly now, realizing something was wrong. The closing is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. We still need your consent signature. I have never agreed to sell my company. Silence followed. I could hear papers moving on her desk. Mr. Combs, are you currently the majority owner? 60%. Diane owns 40. And you have not authorized anyone to negotiate a sale? No. Patricia stopped sounding like someone completing routine paperwork. I apologize. I may have been given an incorrect understanding of the situation. Who is buying the company? I don't think I should discuss additional details without counsel present. You called me by name and asked me to sign. You can at least tell me what I am supposedly selling. She took a breath. The proposed purchaser is Ridgeline Capital Partners. The transaction includes the operating company, its client contracts, equipment, and the Riverside Drive property. My entire life had just been summarized as a list of assets. What is the purchase price? Another pause. $2,100,000. Our last formal valuation had placed the company near $4 million. That did not include several hotel contracts signed afterward. Who negotiated that number? Mr. Combs. I strongly recommend that you speak with an independent attorney before tomorrow. Was my health used to justify the sale? Patricia did not answer immediately, and that delay told me enough. The documents reference concerns about continuity of management following your medical event, 4 months after a mild stroke. My wife was describing me as incapable while arranging to sell the company I still controlled. Her words at dinner no longer sounded careless. Dead weight was not an insult. It was a legal narrative. Send me every document bearing my name, I said. I cannot release privileged materials prepared for your wife. Then preserve them. Do not change a date, delete an email, or allow anyone to claim this conversation never happened. Patricia's voice remained professional. I will document that you denied prior knowledge or consent. Who told you I had been briefed? I can't answer that tonight. Can you tell me whether Diane knows you called? No. This call was placed because your signature was still missing. That mistake was the only reason I knew. If my name had not remained on a checklist, I might have awakened the next morning to discover strangers claiming ownership of my company. Mr. Combs, Patricia continued, do not sign anything until you have your own counsel. I am going to notify the responsible partner that the closing cannot proceed as represented. Not yet. Excuse me? Record my objection, but do not alert Diane tonight. I need time to understand who else is involved. Patricia could not promise silence indefinitely, but she agreed that no valid closing could occur without resolving my ownership rights. We ended the call at 11:22. I returned to the bedroom. Diane lay on her side, breathing evenly. I could not tell whether she was asleep or pretending. I stood there looking at the woman I had trusted for 34 years and wondered how many conversations about my future had happened while I was learning to hold a pencil again. I did not confront her. I emailed myself a summary of Patricia's exact words, recorded the time and number, then photographed every company document stored in our home office. At 7 the next morning, I told Diane I had an early supplier meeting. She kissed my cheek and asked whether my hand felt steady enough to drive. The concern sounded perfect. I left the house and drove to Charlotte Street, where attorney Ed Sloan kept a small office above an insurance agency. When I placed my notes on his desk, he read them twice. Walter, he said, from this moment forward, assume the people selling your company believe you are too weak to stop them. I looked down at my shaking hand. Then they are about to learn the difference between weakness and patience. Ed Sloan listened without interrupting as I described the dinner, Patricia's call, and the proposed sale. When I finished, he removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. Do you have a copy of the operating agreement? At the shop and in my home office. Bring me both. If someone altered one version, we need another for comparison. He wrote 3 instructions on a legal pad and pushed it toward me. Do not confront Diane. Do not sign anything. Do not access accounts or devices you are not legally authorized to use. Why shouldn't I ask my own wife what she's doing? Because right now she believes you know nothing. That is your only advantage. Ed called Patricia while I sat across from him. He formally notified her that I disputed the sale, had never authorized negotiations, and required every document connected to the proposed closing to be preserved. Patricia confirmed that the transaction could not legally proceed without resolving my objection. Who initiated it? Ed asked. I can't disclose privileged communications, she replied, but the materials came through representatives connected to Mrs. Combs and the company's financial office. The company's financial office meant Gary Whitfield. After the call, Ed contacted Ray Delgado, a private investigator he had worked with on financial disputes. Ray arrived that afternoon carrying no briefcase and asking no unnecessary questions. Give me names, dates, companies, and anything that recently felt wrong, he said. I gave him Diane, Gary, Ridgeline Capital Partners, and the attorneys involved. How far back? At least a year. People planning something this large rarely begin with the final document, Ray said. They test the locks before opening the door. His words brought back a conversation I had dismissed in June. Miguel Ortiz and I had been standing in the finishing room when he mentioned that Gary was asking about the resale value of our machinery. He wanted to know what the CNC router, lathes, and delivery trucks would bring if we had to liquidate quickly, Miguel had said. I laughed and blamed year-end forecasting. Miguel did not laugh. Walter, I've known Gary 11 years. He doesn't ask questions like that for projections. At the time, I was still recovering and grateful someone else was handling the numbers. Now Gary's questions sounded like preparation for a sale. I called Miguel from Ed's office. Has Gary asked about equipment values again? Twice. He also told me not to order replacement parts unless he approved them. Did he explain why? He said ownership wanted spending reduced. I'm ownership. I never said that. Miguel became quiet. Then you need to look at the vendor invoices. I asked him not to confront Gary or change his routine. Keep copies of anything you are already authorized to handle. Walter, is someone trying to sell the shop? I don't know yet. It was the truth, but only barely. Over the next 2 days, Ed collected the operating agreement, recent appraisals, board records, and correspondence related to Ridgeline's offer. Ray examined public filings, liens, corporate registrations, and Diane's documented meetings with her attorneys. I continued going home every evening and behaving normally. Diane asked about my supplier meeting, reminded me to take my medication, and spoke gently about how tired I looked. Her concern was so convincing that I began wondering how long she had practiced it. On the 3rd morning, Ray asked us to meet at Ed's office. A folder nearly 2 inches thick rested on the desk. He opened it to a timeline. The first entry was dated 11 days after my stroke. Your wife met with a divorce attorney while you were still in physical therapy, he said. The second entry connected Gary to Ridgeline almost a year earlier. Ray turned the page. Walter, the sale is real, but selling your company is only one part of what they planned. I looked at the names arranged across the timeline and understood that my stroke had not created their betrayal. It had merely convinced them the time was right to act. Ray placed 3 documents side by side on Ed's desk. The first was Ridgeline Capital's purchase proposal. The second was a draft divorce petition prepared for Diane. The third was a management report written by Gary. Separately, each looked official. Together, they formed a trap. Ridgeline offered $2,100,000 for Combs Fine Woodworks, Ray said. What was your latest independent valuation? Just under $4 million before we signed the Charleston hotel contract. Ed pointed to Gary's report. It described falling productivity, aging machinery, uncertain leadership, and an urgent need for outside investment. Are those claims accurate? He asked. No, our waiting list is 11 months long. We replaced the CNC router last year, and revenue increased after my stroke. Gary had taken a healthy company and described it as something approaching collapse. Ray turned to Diane's draft petition. It claimed my medical event had caused cognitive decline, emotional instability, and an inability to participate consistently in business decisions. Did any doctor diagnose cognitive impairment? Ed asked. No. My neurologist cleared me to work. My hand shakes, my mind does not. They're not relying on a diagnosis, Ed said. They're building a collection of observations that can be presented as one. Diane had recorded occasions when I forgot appointments, became tired after therapy, or asked her to repeat information. Normal moments during recovery had been transformed into evidence that I could no longer manage my affairs. The anniversary dinner now looked different. Calling me dead weight before our pastor, friends, children, and CFO created witnesses who had heard her describe me as dependent. If I became angry, she could call me unstable. If I laughed, she could claim I agreed. What happens after she files? I asked. Ed explained that Diane would argue our continued joint ownership had become impossible. She would ask the court to approve a sale during the divorce, presenting Ridgeline's offer as the safest way to protect marital assets. Gary's report would support the reduced price, but I owned 60%, which is why they need you characterized as unable to manage it, Ed replied. Ray showed me emails between Gary and Ridgeline that had been obtained from company records after Ed issued a formal preservation demand. Gary had discussed joining Ridgeline as a consultant once the acquisition closed. He would receive a finder's fee estimated near $180,000, followed by a six-figure annual retainer. The employees who spent years building the company were listed only as labor liabilities. Ridgeline intended to close the custom workshop, sell part of the machinery, and shift production to a cheaper facility outside the state. They aren't buying what we built, I said. They're buying the name, contracts, and land. Then dismantling the rest, Ray confirmed. Diane expected to receive a substantial portion of the sale proceeds in the divorce. The draft proposal also suggested converting my ownership into a cash settlement because ongoing involvement from a medically compromised founder might frighten investors. I would lose my workshop, my employees, and the right to decide what happened to the name printed above its doors. When was the first discussion with Ridgeline? I asked. Ray slid the timeline toward me. Gary had contacted them almost a year before my stroke. My illness had not created the plan. It had made the plan easier to sell. 11 days after I left the hospital, Diane met with her attorney. Within another week, Gary sent Ridgeline updated equipment values. By June, he was asking Miguel what the machines would bring in a rapid liquidation. By August, Diane had begun telling friends that I struggled with basic decisions. At our anniversary dinner, she introduced the final public version. Walter was dead weight, and everyone else was carrying him. I sat back and studied the pages. For 27 years, I had believed Diane and I owned 40 and 60% of the same dream. In reality, she had begun treating her share as a weapon against mine. Can they complete the sale? I asked. Not if we act now, Ed said. Your majority ownership and the operating agreement give us grounds to object. But we need to prove the valuation was manipulated and the incapacity claim was manufactured. Then prove it. Ray did not close the folder. Walter, there is another reason Diane and Gary were coordinating so closely. His tone changed, and Ed looked away. It has nothing to do with Ridgeline. Ray placed a single page in front of me. It was a printed text message log covering 14 months. Before I read the first line, I already knew the next part would hurt more than losing the company. A business can be rebuilt. 34 years of marriage cannot. Ray explained that Gary had used a company email account and a company-issued tablet to communicate with Diane. The device automatically synchronized messages to a business archive that I legally controlled as majority owner. Most of the conversations concerned Ridgeline, but many did not. The first message on the page was 14 months old. Diane wrote that she wished she were waking beside Gary instead of a man who smelled like sawdust even after showering. Gary replied that patience would solve everything. I read the line twice. How far does this go? I asked. Ray placed the remaining pages beside me, far enough that there is no innocent explanation. I will not repeat every message. Some humiliations do not become easier because they are described in detail. But one date remained fixed in my mind, December 18th, 11:42 at night, after our company holiday party. I had gone home early with a severe headache, one of the warning signs preceding my stroke. Diane told me she would stay behind to help clean up. Her message to Gary that night read, "He suspects nothing. Come upstairs when the last employee leaves." The man I trusted with every number in my company had been sleeping with my wife while both of them planned to sell it. Their affair did not begin after my health declined. It began months earlier. The stroke had merely given them a sympathetic explanation for actions already underway. Another message from Diane arrived 11 days after I left the hospital. "The doctor says his recovery will take time. This may be the opening we needed." Gary answered, "Start documenting everything. Ridgeline wants certainty." I set the pages down. My wife had sat beside my hospital bed, held a straw to my mouth, and told me we would face recovery together. Then she went home and described my condition as an opening. Ed asked whether I wanted a moment alone. No. My voice sounded distant even to me. "I want to finish." Later messages discussed the divorce, sale price, and how to control the way Preston and Callie viewed my health. Diane believed Preston could be persuaded if Gary promised him a larger role after the acquisition. She called Callie too emotional and recommended telling her nothing until the sale was complete. My children had been listed like risks in a business plan. "Do we know whether either of them agreed?" I asked. "Not yet," Ray said. "The messages show what Diane and Gary intended, not what your children knew." That distinction mattered. I would not condemn my son or reward my daughter based on assumptions. "Find out," I said, carefully. Ed leaned forward. "Walter, before you make any personal decisions, remember that infidelity and financial misconduct are separate issues. We document both, but we do not let one push us into mishandling the other." I understood. Anger wanted me to drive home, wake Diane, and place the messages beneath the lamp. But confronting her would warn Gary, endanger the company records, and give both of them time to coordinate their stories. I folded the pages and returned them to Ed. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to know who else was willing to let this happen." That afternoon, I sat in my truck outside a hardware store and watched strangers load lumber into their cars. I thought about 34 years with Diane, our small church wedding, the births of our children, the nights we worked together in the garage, and the hospital room where she promised I was not alone. None of those memories disappeared. They simply stopped meaning what I believed they meant. I did not cry. What I felt was colder, a door closing quietly, somewhere inside me. My phone rang before I started the engine. Callie's name appeared on the screen. She called most weeks, simply to ask how my hand was doing. I answered and tried to sound normal. "Dad," she said after less than a minute, "what happened? You don't sound like yourself." I looked at the folder on the passenger seat and made my first decision based on trust rather than blood. "Your mother is trying to sell the company," I said. Callie went silent. Then she answered with a certainty I had not heard from anyone else since my stroke. "Tell me everything." "I'm not going anywhere." I told Callie about Patricia's call, the Ridgeline offer, Gary's report, and the messages proving the affair. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Are you safe in that house tonight?" Not how much the company was worth, not what she might inherit. Whether I was safe. "Your mother doesn't know I discovered anything. Then don't go home alone." I told her Ed knew where I was and that Diane had never threatened me physically. Callie remained uneasy. "Mom has been different for months," she said. Diane had repeatedly canceled their Sunday calls and begun taking conversations in the garage with the door closed. In July, she told Callie that a kindergarten teacher's salary was not enough to build a secure future and hinted that family assets might soon be reorganized. "Did she offer you anything?" I asked. "No," she told me not to worry, because everything would be handled. "Did she mention selling the company?" "Never." "Dad, I don't care about the company or the house. I care that they waited until you were sick." Her voice broke, but she steadied it. "Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere." 2 days later, I called Preston. He answered from the golf club where he often entertained clients. "Dad, can this wait? I'm about to meet someone." "Did you know your mother planned to sell Combs Fine Woodworks?" Silence replaced the noise behind him. "She mentioned options." "Did she mention Ridgeline Capital?" Another pause. I've seen their proposal. I closed my eyes. Preston had known enough to recognize the buyer while I knew nothing. How long? A few weeks. Why didn't you tell me? Mom said the attorneys were handling it and that you'd already agreed in principle. Did you believe her? Given your health, I thought maybe you were stepping away. You work in the company. Have I ever said I wanted to sell it? No, but things changed after the stroke. His answer sounded almost identical to Gary's management report. The business is profitable, the waiting list is full, and I own 60%. What exactly changed? Preston exhaled. Dad, you're not able to run things the way you used to. My right hand shakes. Does that make my judgment worth $2 million less? Ridgeline's offer isn't terrible. The company is worth nearly twice as much, only if someone is willing to pay that. He was not speaking like my son. He was speaking like someone defending a transaction. What did they promise you? I asked. Nothing. The word came too quickly. A position after the sale? They said there could be opportunities. Money? Dad, that's not fair. It was not a denial. I remembered him raising his glass after Diane called me dead weight. He had not been laughing at a joke. He had been supporting the version of me required for the sale. Did you know about your mother and Gary? I asked. Preston sounded genuinely shocked. What are you talking about? His surprise felt real, but it did not erase what he had concealed. Ask your mother. Dad, don't do anything emotional. We can still make the deal work for everyone. Everyone except the 42 employees Ridgeline intends to discard. He became quiet. He had either never asked what would happen to them, or never cared enough to remember. I need time, I said. Are you firing me? I'm deciding whether I can trust you. After the call, I sat alone in my truck. One child had asked whether I was safe. The other had asked whether the deal could still happen. Diane and Gary had measured my children correctly. Callie could not be bought, but Preston could be persuaded to treat betrayal as business. I did not yet know the price he had been offered. I only knew that when the truth finally reached the table, I would give him one last chance to name it himself. Over the next 2 weeks, Ed and Ray worked quietly, while I behaved as if nothing had changed. Diane discussed groceries and therapy appointments. Gary continued sending routine financial reports. Preston kept taking clients to lunch. They believed the sale had been delayed by paperwork, not stopped by my objection. That confidence made them careless. Ray first discovered a private loan Diane had taken against her, 40% ownership stake. The lender was connected to Ridgeline through a holding company. If the sale succeeded, Diane would repay the loan from her proceeds. If it failed, the arrangement protected much of her personal property, while leaving several company guarantees exposed. She built a way to profit if they won and limit her losses if they failed, Ed explained. While I absorbed the damage, that appears to be the plan. Next came 3 equipment appraisals submitted by Gary during the previous 8 months. Each report reduced the estimated value of our machinery. A CNC router, purchased for $310,000, was listed at less than half its market value. 2 upgraded lathes were described as obsolete, and our delivery trucks were valued below recent auction prices. Why submit false values to the insurance company? I asked. To create an official-looking record, Ed said. Gary could use it to make Ridgeline's low offer appear reasonable. False insurance valuations also placed the company at risk if the shop suffered a fire or theft. Then Ray uncovered Blue Ridge Hardware Solutions. For almost 2 years, it had invoiced us for blades, fasteners, finishing supplies, and replacement parts. The individual charges were small enough to disappear among normal expenses, but they were consistently inflated. State records showed the company belonged to Gary's brother-in-law and operated from a rented mailbox. It had no warehouse, employees, or supplier licenses. The materials on its invoices had come from legitimate vendors at lower prices. Gary approved the inflated bills, and the difference passed through the shell company. Ray reconstructed 23 months of transactions. The total was $91,340. I stared at the number. I remembered delaying my own paycheck so employees could receive theirs before Christmas. Gary had watched me make those decisions, while quietly removing money through invented purchases. Can we prove where the money ended? I asked. Not without official process, Ray said. But the invoices and approval records are enough to justify a criminal referral. Ed warned me not to confront Gary. We needed the original invoices, accounting logs, and company emails preserved before he realized we were investigating. As majority owner, I authorized a forensic audit under the operating agreement. The auditors worked after hours under the explanation of an insurance review. They found that Gary had edited vendor descriptions before sending reports to Ridgeline. He had also delayed recording a major hotel contract so the company would appear less valuable during negotiations. By the end of the audit, 3 layers of misconduct sat across Ed's desk: the manipulated sale, false equipment valuations, and more than $91,000 in suspected vendor fraud. What outcome do you want? Ed asked. Protection of the company, a lawful divorce, or criminal consequences for Gary? All 3 handled separately and correctly. I did not want a dramatic accusation that could collapse under scrutiny. I wanted consequences supported by records. One gap remained. The accounting system showed what Gary entered, but not what equipment and materials actually arrived at the shop. We needed someone who understood the machinery, purchase prices, and deliveries before Gary altered the numbers. I thought of Miguel's warning in June. He had recognized something wrong months before I did. I drove to the workshop late Thursday and found him sanding a walnut tabletop in the finishing room. Miguel, I need the truth about Gary's numbers. He studied me, then locked the door. How much do you already know? Enough to understand I should have listened when you warned me. Miguel walked to a cabinet beside his workbench. He unlocked it and removed a small notebook held shut by a rubber band. Then you're ready to see what I've been recording for the last year. Miguel placed the notebook on the workbench between us. Its cover was stained with finish and sawdust, and a rubber band held the pages together. Inside were dates going back almost a year. Beside each date, Miguel had recorded a question Gary asked, a delivery that did not match its invoice, or an equipment value that suddenly changed without explanation. Why didn't you bring this to me sooner? I asked. At first I thought I was seeing mistakes. Then you had the stroke, and Gary started telling everyone not to bother you with details. He turned to a page from June. Gary had asked what our machines would bring in a rapid liquidation. 2 days later, Miguel photographed him removing service records from the CNC router's maintenance file. Without those records, the machine appeared older and less valuable. Another entry compared a Blue Ridge hardware invoice with the materials actually delivered. We paid for 20 gallons of finishing compound, but received 12. The following month, the same shortage happened again. I began checking every shipment, Miguel said. The packing slips never matched the invoices Gary approved. Did you keep copies? He opened the locked cabinet and removed a folder containing photographs, delivery slips, and price comparisons from legitimate suppliers. Every entry in the notebook connected to a document. Miguel had built his own audit while believing he might never need it. Why take this risk? I asked. You could have stayed quiet and kept your job under Ridgeline. Miguel looked almost offended. Walter, you gave me work when nobody else would. You trained me, trusted me with the shop, and kept 42 families employed through 2 bad years. I wasn't going to watch someone strip this place apart. 15 years of loyalty sat in that worn notebook. My wife had 40% of the company and used it against me. Gary had a title and used it to steal. Preston carried my name and remained silent for the promise of an opportunity. Miguel owned nothing, yet he protected the business as if every board belonged to him. I took the evidence to Ed. The dates matched the auditor's access logs and Gary's altered valuations. Miguel's records showed what was delivered, what it cost, and when documents disappeared. This closes the largest gap, Ed said. Gary can no longer claim the discrepancies were accounting errors. Ed laid out our options. We could confront them publicly and risk giving Gary time to destroy evidence or freeze the sale, secure the accounts, and send the suspected fraud through official channels before anyone knew we were moving. Loud feels satisfying for one night, he said. Quiet protects you for the rest of your life. I chose quiet. But before we acted, I invited Miguel to my house. We sat at the same walnut table where Diane had called me dead weight. I placed a proposed ownership agreement in front of him. When this is resolved, I want you to have 15% of Combs Fine Woodworks. Miguel did not touch the document. I didn't keep those records for a reward. I know. That is why you deserve one. Walter, that's your family's company. Family is not a word printed beside someone's name. It is what a person protects when betrayal would be easier. His eyes filled, and he looked away. I only did what was right. You did what the people closest to me refused to do. He finally placed one hand on the agreement. I'll accept it only if I continue working for it. That was never in doubt. The following morning, Ed filed a formal objection to the Ridgeline sale and initiated the financial controls available to me as majority owner. The closing stopped. Company accounts were secured, and the evidence against Gary was prepared for referral to prosecutors. Diane still believed she was approaching a private negotiation. Gary still believed his records remained hidden. Preston still believed silence could protect him. None of them knew that the man they called deadweight had already removed every support holding their plan upright. All that remained was to bring them to the table and let the evidence speak. I asked Diane to invite Gary and Renata for coffee on Sunday evening. I told her I wanted to discuss the delayed sale calmly, before lawyers made everything more expensive. I gave Preston the same explanation, and asked Callie to come without telling anyone what she knew. They all arrived believing they were walking into a negotiation. Diane wore the composed expression she used at church. Gary shook my hand with the confidence of a man who thought he still controlled the numbers. Renata brought wine. Preston sat where he had done homework as a child, while Callie chose the chair beside me. I poured coffee and allowed everyone to settle around the walnut table. Before we begin, Diane said, I want us to remember that Walter has been under enormous stress since his stroke. She was already creating an explanation for anything I might say. My mind is clear, I replied. That is why we're here. The study door opened, and Ed Sloan entered, carrying one folder. Diane's face changed immediately. Why is he here? Because Patricia Vance accidentally called me about the closing you scheduled without my consent. Gary leaned back. This is a misunderstanding. Ed sat across from me and opened the folder. Then the documents should clear it up. He placed the Ridgeline proposal on the table, followed by Gary's management report and the independent valuation, showing the company was worth nearly twice the offer. Gary, I said, why did you describe profitable machinery as obsolete? Market value is subjective. Ed added 3 insurance appraisals, bearing Gary's authorization. Each contained the same reduced values. Then he placed Miguel's notebook beside them, opened to dates matching missing maintenance records and inflated invoices. Gary's confidence weakened. A shop foreman's notes are not financial evidence. No, Ed said. But original delivery slips, system access logs, and the forensic audit are. Renata slowly set down her glass. Gary, what is he talking about? Gary ignored her. Ed presented the Blue Ridge hardware invoices and the state registration showing the company belonged to Gary's brother-in-law. 23 months, I said. $91,340. Those were legitimate purchases. Then explain why the company has no warehouse and why we received fewer materials than it billed. Gary opened his mouth, but no answer came. Ed placed one final document before him, the criminal referral already submitted to the Buncombe County District Attorney's office. Renata stood, picked up her purse, and looked at her husband as if she no longer recognized him. Were you stealing from the company? Sit down, Renata. That isn't an answer. She left without touching the wine she brought. Diane's hands began shaking. Walter, we can resolve this privately. You consulted a divorce attorney 11 days after I left the hospital. I was frightened about our future. You used my recovery to argue that I was incompetent. That was the lawyer's language. Ed placed the archived messages between her and Gary on the table. Was the affair also your lawyer's language? The room went silent. Diane looked toward Callie, perhaps expecting sympathy. My daughter did not move. Dad told me everything, she said. You were planning this while he was learning to use his hand again. Diane turned back to me. Our marriage was already failing. Then you could have left honestly. You did not need to take my life's work with you. Gary tried to stand. I'm not staying for this. You're free to leave, Ed said. The company accounts are frozen, your access has been revoked, and the investigators already have the records. Gary sat down again, suddenly understanding that the meeting was not where consequences began. It was where he learned they had already begun. Preston had remained silent throughout the confrontation. I turned to him last. 2 weeks ago, I asked whether anyone offered you something to keep quiet. He looked at Diane, then Gary. Neither came to his rescue. I'm asking one final time, I said. What did they promise you? His face crumpled. $100,000 after the sale. Callie closed her eyes. For doing what? I asked. For supporting the transition and not creating problems. You mean for helping them describe me as incapable? I told myself it was business. I thought you would receive money and retire. You knew I did not want to sell. Preston's voice cracked. I didn't know how to say no to Mom, but you knew how to stay silent with me. He lowered his head. Diane reached for my hand. Walter, please. We can still fix this. I moved my hand away. You called me dead weight at this table. Tonight, you learned I was the only thing preventing your plan from collapsing. No one answered. I had not shouted, threatened, or insulted anyone. I had simply placed the truth where every person could see it. Quiet did not feel as satisfying as revenge. It felt stronger. Revenge needed them to suffer. The truth only needed them to stop winning. The consequences did not arrive with shouting or broken furniture. They arrived through letters, court filings, and access codes that stopped working. Gary was terminated from Combs Fine Woodworks the morning after the meeting. His name disappeared from every bank account, vendor agreement, and management system. The district attorney opened an investigation into the suspected vendor theft and false insurance valuations. Once Ridgeline's lawyers learned about the forensic audit and criminal referral, they withdrew their offer. The sale collapsed without reaching a closing table. Diane and I finalized our divorce 3 months later. The archived messages, private loan, and attempt to sell the company without my consent left her with far less leverage than she expected. She kept the house on Sunset Mountain Road. I did not fight for it. Too many rooms carried memories of a marriage that no longer existed, and I had no desire to sit at the table where she called me dead weight. I retained control of Combs Fine Woodworks. Miguel received the 15% ownership stake I promised and became operations director, a title finally matching the work he had performed for years. When we signed the agreement, he brought the old notebook with the rubber band. You should keep this, he said. No. Put it back in the cabinet. It belongs with the company history. Preston no longer worked for us. I told him I needed people around me whose loyalty could not be purchased during the next difficult season. He accepted the decision without arguing. For several months, our conversations were brief and uncomfortable. He apologized more than once, but apologies do not restore trust by themselves. Trust returns through repeated choices after nobody is watching. Gradually, he began making those choices. He found another job without using my contacts and started paying back money the company had spent entertaining clients who never produced business. Some Sundays, he called simply to ask how my hand was doing. I answered, but I did not pretend everything was repaired. Forgiveness opened the door. It did not rebuild the house overnight. Callie never asked what she would receive. That was why I wanted to give her something no one could quietly take away. With Ed's help, I created an irrevocable trust in her name and transferred a 12% non-operating interest in the company into it. I also paid off her student loans. When I told her, she began crying. Dad, I didn't stand beside you for this. I know. Miguel said the same thing. That seems to be what trustworthy people say when you recognize them. She hugged me and whispered the promise she had made on the first phone call. I'm still not going anywhere. I moved into a smaller house closer to the workshop. Most mornings, I arrived before 8. My right hand still shook after several hours, and I no longer pretended I could work as I did at 40. Miguel handled daily operations while I designed pieces, trained younger craftsmen, and met the customers who still wanted to shake the hand of the man whose name stood above the door. I had not become useless. My value had simply changed shape. One afternoon, Miguel and I completed a walnut dining table, similar to the one in my old house. A young couple came to collect it. The husband ran his hand along the edge and asked how long something like that could last. Longer than the people who build it, I said, if the joints are honest and someone takes care of it. After they left, I thought about Diane's words. Dead weight, but we love him anyway. She had never meant the second half. But Miguel's notebook, Callie's weekly calls, and even Preston's slow attempts to take responsibility taught me something more useful. The people who truly carry you are not always those seated closest at your table. Sometimes they are the ones quietly recording the truth in a workshop cabinet, or calling without wanting anything in return. I was 66, slower than before and still recovering, but I had sawdust in my lungs and work left in my hands. Diane believed weakness made me disposable. Instead, it taught me exactly who deserved a place in the life I was still building.